AITA for destroying my siblings' reputation after I found out they secretly tried to get me fired? I work at a company where performance isn't just measured by results, but by presence, tone, and perceived stability. I learned how fragile that system really is when my access was quietly restricted, meetings disappeared from my calendar, and HR started asking about my mental health because someone in my family decided to speak for me behind my back. I'm 29F and work at a company where everything is measured, not just output, but tone, collaboration, presence. There are dashboards for performance, internal feedback loops, visibility scores that quietly follow you even when no one talks about them out loud. I've been here long enough to know how the system works, and my strategy has always been simple. Do my job well. Don't give anyone extra material. Go home. I don't overshare at work. I don't vent in Slack. I don't gossip. I show up, deliver, and leave. That's why what happened felt so off from the start. About a month ago, I tried to log into one of the internal tools I use daily and got a message saying my access was temporarily under review. No warning, no email, just gone. I assumed it was a technical issue and messaged IT. They replied hours later saying it wasn't technical and that my manager would follow up. He didn't. Not that day, not the next. Instead, a recurring meeting I'd been part of for almost a year disappeared from my calendar. No explanation, no reschedule notice, nothing. I asked the project lead if it was a mistake. He said, awkwardly, that he'd been told attendance was being adjusted. Adjusted how? He wouldn't answer. A few days after that, my manager finally asked to meet. The invite just said check-in. When I joined, HR was already on the call. That was the first time my stomach dropped. They didn't accuse me of anything outright. That almost made it worse. They asked questions that felt sideways. How was I handling stress lately? Whether I felt supported. If there was anything going on outside of work that might be bleeding into my professional environment. I asked what prompted the meeting. HR said there had been context concerns. Those exact words. Context concerns. I asked what context. They said they couldn't share the source, but that the information had been framed as concern for my well-being and reputation. They emphasized reputation twice, like it was supposed to comfort me. I told them nothing was going on. I said my performance metrics were consistent. I asked if there had been any complaints about my work. HR said no, not about output. Then my manager said, we just want to make sure we're setting you up for success. I asked why success suddenly required my access being restricted. He avoided the question. I left that call shaking, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I could feel something being built around me without my participation. Decisions were happening in rooms I wasn't in. Narratives were forming without my voice. 2 days later, my sibling called me. He sounded proud. That should have been my first clue. He said he'd handled something for me, that he'd reached out to someone at my company because he'd been worried about me and didn't want me to burn out or get hurt professionally. I asked him what he meant. He said he'd sent a message to someone in leadership explaining that I was incredibly capable but under a lot of emotional strain lately, that I tended to internalize stress, and that pushing me too hard right now could backfire. I went cold. I asked him who exactly he contacted. He said he found my manager through LinkedIn and framed it as an old professional connection. He said it was easier that way because HR doesn't listen to family. I told him to stop talking. He laughed and said I was overreacting, that he was just being proactive, that he didn't say anything untrue. He said I'd been snappy lately and that it showed. I told him he had no right to speak about my mental state to my employer. He said I should be grateful someone was looking out for me. I yelled. I don't even remember all of it, just that my throat hurt after. I told him he impersonated a professional contact. I told him he interfered with my career. I told him he painted me as unstable behind my back. He snapped back that if I lost opportunities, that wasn't his fault, that companies needed to know the full picture, and that I was too image obsessed to see he was helping. That's when it clicked why this felt so deliberate. He relies on me financially. Not fully, but enough. If I moved up, my hours would change. My availability would change. The casual support he treated as a given would be less convenient. He'd joked about it before, about me selling out if I got promoted. I hung up on him. That night, I went through everything. Messages, call logs, dates. I wrote down timelines. I didn't screenshot conversations because there weren't any about this. He'd been careful, but I documented exactly what he admitted to saying and when. I requested another meeting with HR. This time, I didn't explain how it made me feel. I didn't plead. I laid out facts. A non-employee contacted my workplace. He misrepresented his identity. He shared unverified claims about my mental health. He attempted to influence internal decisions under the guise of concern. HR stopped interrupting me halfway through. My manager looked uncomfortable in a way he hadn't before. They asked if I was willing to put it in writing. I said yes. After that meeting, the tone shifted. My access was restored within days. The meeting reappeared on my calendar. My manager apologized, not dramatically, but clearly. Meanwhile, my family found out. My sibling exploded. He said I'd stabbed him in the back. He said HR calling him was humiliating. frustrating. He said I made him look like a stalker. I told him he acted like one. He yelled that I was cold, that I cared more about a job than family. I yelled back that family doesn't sabotage each other's livelihoods and call it protection. My parents got involved. They said I should have handled it privately. I asked how I was supposed to privately undo something he did publicly and professionally. My mom said I embarrassed them. I said he embarrassed himself. My sibling accused me of exaggerating, of weaponizing corporate systems against him. I told him he weaponized my reputation first. The last thing he said to me before hanging up was that I'd regret choosing a company over blood. What he doesn't seem to understand is that I didn't choose a company. Update 1. HR called it a wellness alignment conversation, which already felt like a setup. They scheduled it last minute, slapped a neutral title on the invite, and when I joined, there were 2 HR reps instead of 1. Both smiling. Both with that careful tone people use when they're about to imply something without saying it. They opened by thanking me for my continued contributions and then pivoted immediately into questions that had nothing to do with my work. Was I feeling supported? Was I experiencing unusual emotional strain? Did I feel capable of maintaining professional consistency in the coming months? I asked what prompted this. They said there had been a check-in request, not a complaint, not a report, a request. One of them asked if there were stressors in my personal life that might be bleeding into my professional presence. I asked what that meant. She said presence wasn't about output, it was about energy. I asked if my energy had ever interfered with a deliverable. She said no. I asked if I'd missed deadlines. No. If there were peer complaints? No. If my manager had flagged performance issues? No. So why were we here? They said it was preventative. That word again. Preventative. Like I was a cracked pipe waiting to burst. Then one of them asked if I had anyone outside the organization who might be worried about me. Family, friends, people who know you well. That's when it clicked. This wasn't internal. This wasn't about metrics or output or even vibes. Someone had gone around me. Someone had spoken for me. I asked directly who contacted them. They refused to give a name. They said it came from someone familiar with your behavior patterns who expressed concern about my long-term sustainability. Not misconduct, not instability, sustainability, as if I were a failing system. I laughed, not a polite laugh, a sharp one, the kind you don't plan. I said my behavior pattern was showing up, doing my job, not involving my personal life, and not asking for accommodations I didn't need. I asked again what policy I'd triggered. They said none. I asked what risk they were mitigating. They said potential burnout. I told them burnout doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from workload, pressure, or interference. I asked which one they were accusing me of mishandling. They said no one was accusing me of anything. I said then stop treating me like a problem that hadn't happened yet. One of them suggested maybe I was reacting defensively. I snapped back that being questioned about my mental state with zero evidence tends to do that. I told them if someone had concerns, they should have come to me, not HR. I asked if impersonation or misrepresentation was acceptable under company policy. That made them stiffen. They said they'd note my feedback. I ended the meeting early. I didn't ask permission. I just said I was done and left the call. I was furious in a way that sat low and steady instead of loud, the kind that makes your jaw hurt. That night, I texted my sibling. I didn't accuse him. I didn't soften it either. I asked if he had contacted anyone connected to my job or would discuss my mental health with anyone who might have access to my workplace. He replied with a thumbs up emoji and LOLY. That response lit something in me. I told him this wasn't funny and to answer seriously. I told him HR had questioned my stability based on an external concern and I needed to know if he was involved. He sent another message saying I was being paranoid and that work was clearly getting to me. I told him to stop deflecting and answer the question. He didn't. He changed the subject, asked how my day was, sent a meme, acted like nothing was happening. I called him. He didn't pick up. Update 2. We were on a call about something stupid. Literally stupid. He'd called to ask if I still had the login for a shared streaming account we barely even use anymore. That was the tone. Normal. Light. Like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't detonated something in my life and walked away from it. We were mid-conversation when he said, offhandedly, "Oh, by the way, you should thank me. I smoothed something over for you." I remember going quiet. Not calm. Quiet in the way you go when your brain is trying to catch up to something your body already knows is bad. I asked him what the hell he was talking about. He sighed, like I was being difficult, and said, "I just didn't want you hurting yourself before review season. You've been off lately." That word again. Off. I asked him to explain exactly what he meant by smooth something over. He said he'd reached out to someone high enough at my company. His words, high enough, like it was a favor he'd pulled, not a violation. I asked how he even knew who to contact. He laughed and said, "It's not hard. People overshare on LinkedIn. Titles, connections. You work with professionals, remember?" I felt my chest tighten. I asked him who, specifically, he contacted. He dodged, said names weren't important, said what mattered was that he framed it gently. That's when I started raising my voice. I asked him what he told them. He said, very calmly, like he was listing bullet points from a presentation, that he made it clear I was competent, driven, technically strong, but that I could be volatile under pressure. He said he mentioned I sometimes spiraled handled when stakes were high, that I'd been emotionally erratic since taking on more responsibility, and that he was worried I might burn bridges without realizing it. I yelled, like actually yelled. I didn't measure my words. I didn't pace myself. I exploded. I told him he had no right to describe me to anyone, let alone someone tied to my livelihood. I told him he was not my manager, not my therapist, not my guardian. I asked him who the hell he thought he was to label me volatile. He interrupted me and said, "You're doing it right now." That flipped something in me. I screamed that reacting to being betrayed wasn't volatility. It was normal. I told him that sneaking behind my back and planting doubts about my stability was manipulative and slimy. I told him he weaponized concern to make himself feel important. He told me to lower my voice. I told him to go to hell. He said I was proving his point, that this exact reaction was why someone needed to keep an eye on me. He said, "You don't always see yourself clearly." I called him a manipulative idiot who confused control with care. He snapped back and said I was ungrateful, that he'd stuck his neck out for me, that most people would be thankful to have someone advocating for them behind the scenes. I asked how advocating involved calling me erratic. He said he was being honest. I said honesty without consent is just sabotage dressed up nicely. He told me I had a victim complex, said I loved chaos, and then pretended to be shocked when it followed me. Said maybe I liked being the problem because it gave me something to fight against. That one landed hard. I told him he was projecting, that he couldn't stand not being the smartest person in the room, so he had to shrink me to feel useful. I told him my career wasn't his playground and my reputation wasn't his tool. He said I needed oversight. Actually said those words. Oversight, like I was a malfunctioning machine. I told him he needed a life that didn't involve managing mine. He laughed, a short, sharp laugh. Said, "If you didn't act like this, I wouldn't have to." That's when I lost it completely. I told him he was arrogant, invasive, and deeply insecure. I told him the only reason he thought I needed supervision was because he couldn't stand that I operated without his approval. I told him he crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He told me I was being dramatic, that I'd thank him later when this phase passed and my job was still intact. I asked him if he understood what he'd done, if he realized that HR had questioned my mental state because of him, that I'd been treated like a liability instead of an employee because he decided to play concerned professional. He said I was exaggerating, said HR always does that, said I should stop taking everything so personally. I called him reckless. He called me unstable. I told him never to speak to anyone connected to my work again. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. He told me I didn't get to dictate his actions when he was trying to help. I told him help that I didn't ask for was interference. He said I was impossible to deal with. I said he was impossible to trust. There was a long pause after that. Heavy, ugly. Then he said, coldly, "This is why people worry about you." I don't remember exactly what I said after that. I know I was shouting. I know my throat hurt. I know I told him if he ever inserted himself into my professional life again, I'd make sure everyone knew exactly how and why. He hung up on me mid-sentence. No goodbye, no resolution, just a dead line, and that awful silence afterward where everything he said keeps replaying whether you want it to or not. After the call, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, messages that alternated between concern and condescension. He told me I'd embarrassed him, told me I'd overreacted, told me he was just trying to protect me from myself. I didn't respond. What I did do was sit there, staring at my screen, realizing that someone who claimed to care about me had no problem painting me as unstable to strangers with power over my future, and then using my reaction to justify it. Update 3. HR followed up at the start of the week. Not an email, a calendar invite. No context, just a time block and the same neutral subject line as before. This time, there were more questions, sharper ones. They asked whether I'd recently experienced emotional instability that could affect my ability to lead projects. They asked whether I felt overwhelmed in ways that might be visible to colleagues. They asked whether I'd noticed changes in my communication style, my tone, my reactivity. I asked if any of my performance metrics had dropped. They said no. I asked if any direct reports had complained. They said no. I asked if any deadlines had been missed. They said no. So I asked why we were still here. One of them said they were connecting patterns. Another said they were obligated to document concerns once raised. I asked if impersonating a professional contact or misrepresenting a personal relationship to my employer was a violation of company policy. They didn't answer that question. They wrote something down instead. I asked again. They said they couldn't comment on hypotheticals. The whole conversation felt upside down. I was answering for things I hadn't done while the person who actually interfered wasn't even in the room. I left that meeting shaking, not crying, shaking, like my body was trying to burn off something toxic that had already gotten into my bloodstream. I called my sibling the second I got out. He didn't answer, so I messaged him, short, direct, told him HR had followed up again, told him his concern was now a paper trail attached to my name. He replied replied hours later like this was an inconvenience, not a crisis. He said I needed to relax. Said HR always over documents. Said if I was confident in myself, this wouldn't bother me so much. That did it. I called him again. This time he picked up. I didn't ease into it. I told him he needed to undo what he did. Immediately, I told him to contact whoever he contacted and correct the record. I told him to admit he'd overstepped. He laughed. Actually laughed. He said I was spiraling. Said this level of anger wasn't normal for someone who claimed to be fine. Said if I was secure in my work, I wouldn't be acting like this. I yelled that anyone would be angry if someone tampered with their livelihood. He said I was being dramatic. I said he was reckless. He told me I was obsessed with control. Said I couldn't stand not managing every narrative around me. Said I treated people like assets and liabilities. I told him the only reason he had opinions about my job at all was because my income cushioned his mistakes. That when he screwed up, there was always someone else cleaning it up. That he'd never had to sit in a meeting where strangers discussed his emotional stability like it was a variable. That set him off. He started yelling, loud, fast, accusatory. He said I used money to dominate people. Said I bought leverage and then pretended it was generosity. Said I liked having people dependent on me because it made me feel superior. I yelled back that he used vulnerability to manipulate narratives. That he framed control as care and interference as protection. That he planted seeds and then stood back pretending he was worried when they grew into problems. He accused me of threatening him. I said I was naming reality. He said if I escalated this, I'd ruin him. Said I didn't understand the consequences. Said people wouldn't see this my way. I told him he'd already escalated it the second he lied to my employer about who he was and why he was contacting them. He said he hadn't lied. He said he'd simplified. He said context mattered more than labels. I told him that was the same excuse he always used when he crossed lines. That nothing was ever his fault, just misunderstood. He told me to watch my tone. I told him to watch his boundaries. He said I was unstable. Said I was burning bridges over nothing. Said I was making myself look exactly like the person he'd warned them about. That comment felt calculated, like he wanted to provoke me so he could point and say, see? I didn't hold back. I told him he was a coward who hid behind concern because he couldn't own his need for relevance. I told him he inserted himself into my life because he needed to feel important somewhere. I told him if he thought he could meddle and then gaslight me into gratitude, he was wrong. He yelled that I'd regret this, that I didn't know who I was messing with, that people talk. I told him I already regretted ever trusting him, regretted assuming he knew where the line was, regretted thinking he saw me as a person instead of a project. The call ended ugly, not with a hang-up this time, with both of us talking over each other until neither of us could hear anything except our own voices. After that, things went quiet in a way that felt intentional. He stopped calling, stopped arguing, but I started noticing other things, subtle things, mutuals viewing my social media stories and then unfollowing, old acquaintances suddenly checking my profile, messages from people asking if I was doing okay without explaining why. No direct accusations, just enough noise to make it clear something was moving without me. HR hasn't closed the file. My sibling hasn't backed down. And whatever version of me he's been selling, it's still out there, circulating, shaping conversations I'm not in. Nothing feels finished. Update 4. I stopped arguing and started documenting. And that's when things got sharp. Up until this point, every interaction had been slippery. Vague phrases, soft voices, carefully worded emails that said nothing while implying everything. I was done trying to read between lines. I wanted lines. On record, I emailed HR and asked for written clarification. Not opinions, not summaries. I asked for timestamps of when concerns were raised, what category the source fell under, and whether the individual had represented themselves as someone with professional authority over my work. The reply didn't come that day. It came the next morning, and it wasn't an answer. It was a meeting request. Mandatory. 2 HR reps. 1 calendar block marked alignment. The moment I joined, I could tell something had shifted. No warm smiles. No wellness language. No asking how I was feeling today. One of them asked me, very calmly, whether the person who contacted HR was related to me. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. They asked if he had my permission to speak on my behalf. I said absolutely not. They asked if he had represented himself as a colleague, former coworker, or professional peer. I said yes. They asked if he had framed my behavior as emotionally unstable, erratic, or risky under pressure. I said yes. No one interrupted me. No one softened the questions. One of them typed without looking up. The other leaned back and asked me to repeat the part about how he described my emotional state. I did, word for word, as best I could remember. That was the moment the tone fully changed. They stopped calling it a conversation. They started calling it information. They asked if I had any reason to believe he'd contacted anyone else. They asked whether he'd ever accessed my professional profile profiles, credentials, or internal terminology. They asked if he benefited financially from my employment. I answered everything. When the call ended, they didn't tell me what would happen next. They just said they'd be in touch. Not soon, not after review, just in touch. That night, my phone blew up. He sent me a long message, the kind that's clearly been rewritten 5 times and still manages to drip with condescension. He said I was twisting things. He said HR departments are political and that I was painting myself as hostile. He said people who get promoted don't create waves, they adapt. He said I was embarrassing myself and risking everything over ego. I called him immediately. He answered like he was waiting for it. I didn't ease into it. I asked him what part of impersonating a professional contact he thought was defensible. He snapped back that I was exaggerating, that impersonation was a dramatic word, that he'd just spoken as someone who knew me well. I yelled that knowing me personally was exactly why he had no right to interfere. He told me to lower my voice. That set me off. I told him he didn't get to tone police me after quietly trying to kneecap my career. He said I was proving his point, that anyone hearing me right now would see instability. I said anyone hearing him would hear manipulation wrapped in fake concern. He called me vindictive. I called him exposed. He said I was burning bridges I couldn't rebuild. I said he lit the fire and was now complaining about the smoke. He accused me of trying to destroy him out of spite. I accused him of trying to control me by poisoning rooms I wasn't in. He said HR would side with the company. I said companies don't like being lied to. Update 5. My family got involved and they didn't come in neutral. It started as one-off messages that pretended to be concerned. Hey, just checking in. He's really upset. This has gone too far. Then it turned into pressure. Not questions. Statements. Accusations dressed up as concern. Someone asked why I was going nuclear over something that came from a good place. Someone else told me I was punishing intentions instead of actions. Like that distinction even mattered when the action was already done. One person said I was risking my sibling's future over a misunderstanding. Like he accidentally tripped and fell into impersonating a professional contact. I snapped. I stopped explaining softly. I stopped translating. I told them flat out that he didn't misunderstand anything. He calculated. He chose the timing. He chose the language. He chose to contact people with power over my career and frame me as unstable. That's not confusion. That's a decision. That didn't land. They said I was being rigid. They said families solve things internally. They said companies are cold and unforgiving, and I should have protected him from consequences. One person actually said, "You know how he is," like that was supposed to excuse it. I said exactly. I know how he is. That's why I'm not pretending this was harmless. Then my phone rang. It was him. He didn't ease into it. He was already screaming when I picked up. He said I was humiliating him. He said people were asking questions. He said I was dragging his name through professional spaces he didn't even belong to. He said I'd turned him into a villain. I yelled back that he turned himself into one the second he typed that message pretending to be someone he wasn't. He shouted that I always thought I was better than him, that I looked down on him, that I used my job and my stability as a weapon. I told him I never needed to think it. His behavior proved it every time he tried to control something that wasn't his. He called me cold. He said I was heartless. He said any decent person would have handled this privately. I said any decent person wouldn't quietly undermine someone else's livelihood and then cry when it blew back. He told me I was tearing the family apart. I told him he tore through professional boundaries and expected applause. The yelling didn't stop. It escalated. He accused me of enjoying this. I accused him of panicking because his narrative finally cracked. He said HR would blacklist me as difficult. I said he should have worried about difficulty before lying to them. At one point, he screamed that I destroyed the family dynamic forever. I screamed back that family dynamics don't override consent, and they sure as hell don't override my career. The call ended abruptly. No goodbye, no resolution, just the sound of him hanging up hard enough that it cut off mid-word. After that, the messages slowed, not because people understood, but because there was nothing left to say without admitting what he'd done. The tone shifted from scolding to silence, not supportive silence, tense silence. At work, nothing was said out loud, but I could feel it. Meetings that used to be casual were formal. Emails were tighter. Everything was being watched, logged. Wait. At home, my phone stayed face down. I didn't feel relieved. I felt braced. Update 6. HR concluded their review this week. They didn't do it dramatically. No big meeting. No performance theater. Just a calendar invite labeled follow-up. 3 people on the call, cameras off, voices clipped and careful. They told me the contact who reached out about me had violated multiple company policies. They used exact words: impersonation, misrepresentation, unsolicited interference. They said it slowly, like they wanted to be very clear they weren't softening. They told me the contact claimed professional familiarity that didn't exist. They told me the contact framed personal opinions as observed behavior. They told me the contact presented mental health speculation as risk assessment. They told me this wasn't a gray area. They said the matter had been escalated internally and externally to ensure it couldn't happen again. They didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. Their tone wasn't defensive anymore. It was procedural. They apologized. I'll take a quick break here to remind you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. Not the vague, sorry if you felt uncomfortable kind. They apologized for the disruption to my work, the questions around my stability, and the temporary limitations placed on my access. They acknowledged it should never have reached me the way it did. Everything was restored. Tools, visibility, meetings, access. My manager followed up separately and said, very flatly, that nothing in my record supported the narrative that had been introduced. He didn't apologize. He corrected course. That was enough. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. My sibling found out the same day. I don't know who told him or how he pieced it together, but my phone lit up like I'd flipped a switch. Call after call after call. I ignored the first three. The fourth one I answered. He didn't even say hello. He started yelling immediately. He said I'd weaponized corporate systems against him. He said I'd turned a private concern into an official mark against his name. He said I was cruel, calculated, and vindictive. I told him to stop screaming. He screamed louder. He said I knew how companies work and I used that to hurt him. He said I knew exactly how serious this would be and did it anyway. He said I should have protected him the way he'd tried to protect me. I snapped. I yelled that protection doesn't involve impersonating people and lying about someone's mental state to their employer. I yelled that concern doesn't look like sabotage dressed up as professionalism. I yelled that if he'd actually cared, he would have talked to me instead of people who control my income. He called me heartless. I told him he was reckless and stupid for thinking he could play corporate whisperer without consequences. He said no one would ever trust me again after this. He said I'd branded myself as difficult. He said people would remember that I escalated. I told him trust wasn't my problem. Interference was. He said I'd ruined his reputation. I told him he ruined it the second he decided my career was his to manage. He accused me of enjoying it, of liking the power, of always needing to be right. I told him the only thing I enjoyed was not having someone else narrate my sanity to my employer. He went quiet for a second. Then he said, through clenched teeth, that I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I told him he crossed it weeks ago, and I was just standing where he pushed me. The call ended with him swearing at me and hanging up. After that, my family went quiet. Update 7. HR scheduled one final meeting. No vague language this time. No alignment phrasing. No wellness talk. They laid out the conclusion in plain terms. The contact was identified, the misrepresentation confirmed, and the interference formally logged. They told me safeguards had been put in place so my name couldn't be used again by anyone outside the organization. They told me my performance record stood on its own. They told me the review cycle would proceed without external context. They didn't ask how I felt. They didn't need to. When I logged back into my systems afterward, everything was exactly where it had been before this started. Access restored. Projects reassigned back to me. Calendar invites quietly reappearing, no explanations attached. The silence from leadership wasn't awkward anymore. It was procedural. That same night, my sibling showed up unannounced. Not to apologize, to argue. He said I'd turned a private family issue into a permanent mark. He said people were asking him questions now. He said I'd made him look unstable. He said I'd gone too far over something that could have stayed inside the family. I told him he dragged the family into my workplace first. He yelled that I enjoyed watching him squirm. I yelled back that he enjoyed speaking for me until it cost him something. He said I always needed to win. I said this wasn't a competition. It was a boundary he bulldozed. He called me cold. I told him cold was still employed. He said I'd regret choosing a job over blood. I told him I didn't choose anything. He made the choice when he typed my name into someone else's inbox and pretended to be someone he wasn't. That was when he stopped yelling. Not because he understood, because he had nothing left to threaten me with. The next day, the family group chats went dead. No lectures, no pressure campaigns, no messages about forgiveness or intent. Just read receipts and nothing else. The silence wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't punishment either. It was retreat. At work, things moved forward without ceremony. No announcement, no dramatic reversal. Just my manager asking if I was ready to take on the expanded scope we'd discussed months ago. Just leadership treating me like someone whose credibility had been tested and documented. My sibling hasn't contacted me since that night. Neither has anyone else about letting it go. The end. Yo, sibling, you're a jealous, mooching snake who faked being a concerned colleague to tank her career because a promotion might cramp your freeloading lifestyle. Pathetic control freak move. Bro got caught, cried victim, and dragged the family into your mess. Trash behavior. Family enabling him with keep it private. Y'all raised this sabotage goblin. On it.aita? Hell no. NTA. You documented facts, went through proper channels, and protected your livelihood from a backstabbing leech. Queen shit. Keep winning. Let the dead weight stay cut off. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.